So thank you. Welcome everyone to our BOO Town Hall. And I just want to hand it over now to Kenneth, who is the chairman of our Book of Order Review Committee. Thank you, Kenneth.
Okay, all right. Well, can I thank you all for taking time out of a Sunday afternoon to become familiar with this document, which is paradoxically so important, but which we refer to so very rarely. And that's our church constitution, which we officially call the Book of Order. Now, for your individual reference, Chin Chin or Marvin will now paste a link into the chat box, which is to the Book of Order containing the amendments that the committee has come up with, all marked in red and highlighted in yellow, so that you can refer to it on your own, as well as during the course of my presentation. This will later be followed by a link to the 2008 Book of Order. I think that most of our older members would have a hard copy of the Book of Order from that time it was printed. But for those who don't, we scanned the original 2008 Book of Order, and the second link will be to that for you to be able to compare with the Book of Order for 2020 as proposed by the advisory committee. So if I can just kind of take you through a bit of progression. And there is a specific intent as to why I'm actually walking you through a historical pictography of the church, and that's really to emphasize that that it is very much a process. The Book of Order is not something which is fixed in time. As with Books of Order in the broader Presbyterian community, it is a living document. Which is subject to and subordinate to the scriptures. It incorporates the doctrinal standards, which is set forth in the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, the Westminster Confession of Faith, the larger catechism, and the shorter catechism. It acts as a common reference document to facilitate governance at St. Andrews. It provides definitive guidance to our leaders who have been elected by the congregation. It provides protection to the congregation by setting out procedures and limitations within which our elected leaders must carry out their responsibilities. And it provides a basis by which each member of our congregational family can hold each other accountable. So to quote our Book of Order, quote, "In these confessional statements, the church declares to its members and to the world who and what it is, what it believes, what it resolves to do. These statements identify the church as a community of people known by its convictions as well as by its actions." So on the screen, you'll see a variety of different books of order from different Presbyterian communities around the world, and from which we've also drawn guidance as we went through our review. The St. Andrews Book of Order in its present edition was accepted by the congregation in 2008, and that was after about 2 years of work by the task force, which was headed by two congregation members, Chuck Moster and Andrew Watterson. So I actually have a copy of the presentation, which they did back in 2008 for those who are interested. But it was I think it was quite an exhaustive process. And we are, the current advisory committee is actually really thankful for being able to rest on the shoulders of the work that they did. So why is the Book of Order necessary? The number of points which I will bring to your attention. As I click on the screen, these are just different sections that I've drawn from the Book of Order. It serves to strengthen the personal commitment and the life and witness of our community. And as with any group of people who come together for a common purpose, the regulations serve to provide a framework to guide the interactions within our group of people and also with parties outside of our group. Now, in the unique history of St. Andrews as an international church, the fluidity of our membership and ministers have made it actually even more important to intentionally document down our traditions and our practices. We haven't typically been able to rely on institutional memory to ensure consistency in the Book of Order. So post World War II, St. Andrews largely operated at the discretion of persons who were elected as elders and deacons, and also the appointed ministers. The procedures and the limitations were governed by traditions conveyed by one generation to the next, by word of mouth, and by guidance from our older members to our younger members, and as well as a lot of ad hoc documentation and determination. So prior to the 2008 Book of Orders, St. Andrews had a document called the Articles of Operation and Bylaws, and that was in effect around 1996. And before that, we were governed by an information directory. Now, in a continuance of our historical tradition of self-governance, these articles and operation and bylaws were superseded and consolidated into the 2008 Book of Order. Now, the 2008 Book of Order was premised largely on the PCUSA Book of Church Order, and this guiding pillar is specifically expressed in our Book of Order at section Roman numeral 6, and I'll just read that out for you very briefly. Which Christ has appointed. So this notion, this idea of congregational self-governance is a bedrock of Presbyterian polity, and is explicit also in Articles 32 and implicit in Article 35 of the GPM Constitution. And that's something that I just want to keep you guys to keep in the back of your mind as we go through the presentation. All right. So within the 2008 Book of Order, it's also interesting to note the citation of one of the most important thoughts guiding the church post-Reformation. And it says, Ecclesia Reformata Semper Reformanda, which in English is translated as the church reformed, always reforming. And it captures the foundational expectation that re-examination and change is intrinsic to the Protestant Reformation and the Presbyterian ethos. According to the 2008, accordingly, the Book of Order provides an entire section on reform, and it's introduced by the caption, St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church shall be faithful to the Lordship of Christ and to its historic tradition of the Church reformed, always reforming by the Spirit of God. In this faith, amendment procedures are understood as a means of faithfulness as God breaks forth yet more light from God's Word. In short, our congregation is expected to periodically review its Book of Order. So, in addition to the good practice of regular review, there were also specific issues and events which catalyzed the 2020 review. One of the primary catalysts for this 2020 review was the crisis brought by attempts to transfer the physical properties of St. Andrews. And this was unfortunately premised on a misunderstanding of the history of St. Andrews and the manner in which St. Andrews' physical properties are regarded in law. Much of this has been exhaustively addressed by Elder David Lai during the 2019 AGM. And his presentation can be reviewed in the minutes of that AGM. And his slides were furthermore on display in the fellowship hall for months after that AGM. So I'm only going to highlight a few important points. The church has got two properties, one of which on which the sanctuary sits, and the second on which the manse sits. The sanctuary land, also called Lot 209, belongs to the state. The manse land, also called Lot 210, is registered in the name of the treasurer of St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church. That's the first one at 209, that belongs to the state. The second one is Lot 210, which is the land on which the man sits, and which is registered in the name of the treasurer of St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church. The church, if I can point out, this is on your screen now, are scans of the title of the man's land, that's Lot 210. And you'll note that the beneficiary is, as I circled in red, the treasurer of St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church, not Selena Chin, nor any other individual person. Okay, so I really hope that this will put to rest any allegations that the church community may be hearing about who exactly is on the title of the property. Okay? Now, the treasurer of St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church is a unique, perpetual legal office incorporated by Parliament in 1937. It is not any one person. With the benefit of advice from legal counsel, provisions in the Book of Order have been strengthened and clarified to mitigate future risks of similar events and misunderstanding recurring. In the process, it also became apparent to the committee that there were many other provisions in the 2008 Book of Order which required clarification. I spoke with Andrew Watterson, and corresponded with Chuck Mosca as well. And I like what Andrew Watterson shared with me in an email, so I'm going to read that out to you. Andrew said that one thing to note is that the version of the UK Book of Order that we had at the time was a scanned PDF version, which was impossible to cut and paste into a Word document. Hence, to have used the UK Book of Order would have required someone to have typed in all 192 pages of it. And this is probably one of the reasons why the US version was used, as you could get a copy that could be cut and pasted. Yeah. The challenge, of course, is that the 2008 cut and paste approach inadvertently resulted in provisions which are only relevant to national bodies such as the General Assembly, the Synod, and Presbytery being included into the Book of Order. So the advisory committee took an exhaustive clause-by-clause approach to its review, and for the benefit of the congregation and today's presentation, the proposed amendments and clarifications have been grouped into 4 big buckets to sort of help us get a total picture view in as quick a manner as possible. We'll deal with the most important bucket first, and that's the substantive bucket. The advisory committee found that there were 4 major areas within the substantive bucket that needed clarification. One was relating to the physical properties, as was just summarized. The research that was undertaken by our lawyers obliged all clauses relating to the properties, the treasurer, and the board of managers to be reviewed and strengthened to mitigate this perennial misunderstanding. And if you've got a pen and paper down, I'll quickly highlight those sections for you. We had a look at the preface. We looked at section 1, 6, and 7, especially 6 and 7. And there were minor changes that had been made in sections 2.2.4, 2.3, 2.5.1.1, 2.6, and 3.6.2. Now, again, in the link that was provided, things have been highlighted in red. So you can refer to that as well to gain an understanding of where we had to effect strengthening. The second sub-bucket in the substantive category was confessions related. Now, previously, sections 1 to 8 were encapsulating broad universal Presbyterian principles. And what we've done at the suggestion of the committee is to relocate all of this and consolidate it under Appendix A. One of the things that we had to clarify was the difference between the Church Universal and St. Andrew's locally. And it's kind of interesting at this to just point out that our confessions is actually quite exhaustive. Say by comparison, the GPM Constitution has about 4 sentences devoted to confessions, whereas our Book of Order fills about 10 pages. Yeah. The qualification for church office is explicitly linked to biblical basis as opposed to secular inclusiveness. So if you had a look at the old Book of Order, you would have encountered a number of clauses which speak about fair representation through persons of all ages, races, and disabilities. And this has been replaced by language along the lines of biblical qualifications and principles. There is still, however, a provision for diversity and inclusiveness, and this was actually drawn from the PCUSA Book of Order language, and this is now found in Appendix A, Part 4, subsection 4. The third area is history. We've had the benefit of a centenary celebration, and obviously the opportunity which that celebration created to dive deeply into the historical archives of St. Andrews. So we've been able to therefore create a more accurate historical narrative from these archives. So it also became evident through the centenary process that there were a number of errors and oversights, and we corrected these as well. Last area is that of authority and responsibility. in its review of the Book of Order, it became evident that to the committee that the ultimate intention of the church is for responsibility to be borne by session. And so wherever necessary, we clarified this intention with flexibility and recourse to address our periodically low elder numbers. And if you are interested in just a quick listing of like sections which deal with this particular bucket, it's 1.6, 2.1.1, 2.1.2, 2.2, 2.2.4, and 2.2.6. Our second bucket is that of consistency, and this itself can be broken down into 3 sub-buckets relating to current practices, relating to language, and relating to the GPM constitution. So in respect of current practices, we have now put in formal acknowledgement of St. Andrew's long-standing committees through which we've also clarified procedures in respect of nominations and elections, and this is found in 1.7.1 and 4.7. And we've also found it necessary to address procedures at the Pastoral Search Committee, and those changes can be found in sections 5.4. The other major area of review for us in respect of practices was that in relation to calling our minister. And that's found in now section 5.6 and in 5.8. The second sub-bucket has to do with language. And we found that it was a bit confusing because there were a number of different references to St. Andrews. We standardize all of that as, quote, St. Andrews, end quote. And we've done this throughout the entire Book of Order. And we've also clarified ambiguities which relate to the church at a local level and the church at a universal level. There was some debate over the I would think that you can call them archaic language, but references, for example, to courts have now been standardized as governing bodies in order to reach our modern and local usage. And there were a number of grammatical corrections that were carried through as well. That takes us into the GPM constitutional sub-bucket. So St. Andrews has been in existence since 1902. It's about 60 years before the GPM. And the church agreed to join with several other Presbyterian churches to form the GPM in 1971. Now, as a member of the Gereja Presbyterian Malaysia, we are also thus guided by the GPM's constitution. And as with all healthy organizations, especially Reformed churches such as St. Andrews and the GPM, revisions and reform should be regularly undertaken. As such, the GPM's constitution, which is in the Chinese language, is in its 7th revision, which was undertaken in 2012, and our Book of Order has been under review since last year. Areas which have been brought into alignment with the latest 2012 version of the GPM constitution include, number 1, the biblical basis of ordaining deacons. This was clarified by removing temporary appointments for deacons. Worship has also been segregated for consistency. So if you want to look at our Book of Order where this is addressed, that's in 2.3.1 Part B and 2.3. The second item of significant alignment with the GPM constitution is the removal of the Board of Deacons and consolidation of the church committee in favor of a mandatory deacons court. This is a substantial change that affected a lot of sections. I'll read them out. If you've got a pen and paper, here you go. 1.1, 1.7.1, 2.1, 2.2.1, 2.2.2, 2.2.4, 2.2.5, the entirety of 2.3, 2.4, and 2.5.1. So this is a major area that had to be addressed in order to bring alignment with the latest version of the GPM Constitution 2012. There's also a third item, that being limitation on how many members of one family may concurrently hold office. You will find this in section 1.6 part E. Okay, and the fourth major area to highlight to your attention today is the removal of the perpetual nature of deaconship. Now, there was a lot of debate about this internally, but we've ultimately concluded on following GPN's guidance in this regard. Okay, so moving on to the third major bucket, which is that of presentation. So as we went through the 2008 Book of Order clause by clause, it became very evident that there were portions which were notably repetitive. We've consolidated these and streamlined them. So for example, the new section 2.7 combines what was previously expressed at 9.11.4, 9.12.2, and 9.12.8. The new section 2.1.1 consolidates what was previously clause 9.11.1 and 9.14.1.1. Yeah. At a consolidation level, provisions relating to membership were all consolidated under one section, which is now section 3, as opposed to previously appearing in different sections, 9.12 and 9.14. The last bucket, that of procedures. Minor areas here. We've made some provisions to strengthen good governance. So that you can find at point 6. In answer to Vivian's question just before we started, there was some updates to how the MCO committee carries out its duties. That's found at 2.5.1.3, and also the responsibilities of the fellowship com at 2.5.1.4, but pretty minor, Vivian. Yeah. So along the way, it was the question was posed: who exactly was tasked to undertake the 2020 review? I'll read to you from clause 15.2 of the Book of Order, and it says that session shall form an independent advisory committee on the Book of Order, which shall examine the proposed amendment for clarity and consistency in language and for compatibility with other provisions of the Book of Order of St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church and the Constitution of the Presbyterian Church of Malaysia. So the chart on your screen right now identifies the particular persons who have participated to varying degrees on the 2020 Advisory Committee. Now, as a matter of interest, members of this 2020 Advisory Committee included the capacities of 7 lawyers, 1 clergy, 5 elders current and past, 2 deacons current and past, and 2 chartered accountants. Similarly, the members of the 1993 Constitutional Task Force and the 2008 Book of Order Task Force were also drawn from the congregation. And this is highlighted to you to ultimately point out that it is a congregation as a body which must determine what amendments are to be adopted. So, in summary, I just want to highlight that it's really important for this knowledge to be shared. I think particularly among the younger and the newer members of St. Andrews. After all, they are the ones going to be inheriting about 100 years of legacy here. So I would encourage those who are young and new today to read and become familiar with the Book of Order, and to do an occasional deep dive into the issues of governance and church administration. I have also prepared a detailed frequently asked questions on what we've discussed today, and I'll have that link posted up and shared with participants, probably by email, if not WhatsApp. Okay, and that takes me to the end of the presentation. So thank you for your patience, and if you've got questions, I think that now would be the time to ask.
Yeah, thank you, Kenneth. Maybe at this point, I'll stop the presentation recording, and then we can take the questions.